Now time to talk about the NAIA championship. We had Jackson Waring on the show last week. His Grandview Vikings, they handled business and then some, Matt. You were on the scene, which you don't get to say too often on this show, but you had boots on the ground down there in Durham. Talk to me about this Grandview squad, overall reactions from this one, man.
Yeah, had boots on the ground, had some media credentials over there in Durham, North Carolina. Had a
Hell yeah.
fantastic time on that trip. But man, Grandview, like you can't really say much else besides they dominated, absolutely deserved every bit of the praise they got this season. And Jackson Waring, man, I mean, that's all I have to say about this game. He had 4 passing touchdowns, probably would have had a rushing touchdown if he hadn't fumbled on the goal line to start the game. But man, just an absolute wonderful showing from him. Isaiah Toki catching his first 2 receptions, and notable stats from Waring that he only completed 11 passes, 4 were for touchdowns. That's just absurd. He took his looks when he got them. The O-line did a great job of protecting. And Grandview's defense, not necessarily something that jumped out at the stat sheet, but being at the game, I can tell you they dominated all across the board today. Kaiser only going 1 for 13 on 3rd down throughout the game. And a national title is wild. Yeah, and Grandview's offense, to put it, they took advantage of those situations. They went 7 for 11 on 3rd down, just super efficient on the day. Knew exactly what they wanted to do going into this game, executed to perfection. I mean, they were in control the entire time.
Dude, talk about that Waring to Toki connection. I mean, we've seen it throughout the playoffs, and it feels like those two connect, and they connect early. It feels like they're one of the first scores in a lot of these late-round playoff games. You had the chance to talk to him, it sounds like. Tell me about what he said about his quarterback.
Yeah, asked him after the game, that connection with Waring. It's very obvious that they have that connection going for them, and he said that's his brother. I mean, everybody on the team rallies around him. Got to talk to head coach Woodley as well. Mentioned the same thing. This team rallies around him. Obviously, he was named the NAIA Player of the Year for good reason, and showed it in this game. It's just absolutely crazy. And not to mention just with the 4 passing touchdowns for him. He also had 21 rushes for 203 yards at the quarterback position. His line gave him all time in the world to throw. He did really good on that scramble drill. Kaiser just could not get the pressure necessary to shut him down at all. And Isaiah Toki, that has a lot to do with it. That connection specifically, you could tell they're tight. Both touchdown passes that worked through to him were absolutely on the money. Read the timing over the middle of the field on that seam route both times. Absolutely perfection. Like, could not have drawn it up better. Could not have thrown it better. Isaiah was in the right spot at the right time just because he knows they have that connection.
Yeah, he showed off the arm talent for sure. It looked like some off-schedule throws, too. It's not like he's, sitting back in the pocket and getting a nice little 3-step and getting a nice hitch into a throw every single time. He's rolling out, sometimes throwing across his body, and he's able to hit targets all the way down the field. And he makes some off-schedule throws that I think are really impressive, and that if you didn't watch any of his throws, looking at the stat line, you think, oh, someone who's incredibly efficient, didn't throw the ball a ton, like, maybe some more on-schedule type stuff. But he was able to do a lot of it, and the stat that stuck out to me, I had it in our notes here. The first team to defeat the last 3 national championship teams in a single season. Kaiser in the Natty, then in the previous rounds, Northwestern and Morningside. That is a ridiculous statistic. And 2 other teams in, the GPAC, pair right there that I mentioned that in their own right could have totally been in this game as well. They played some really good ball down the stretch, but beating the last 3 national championship teams en route to earning one yourself.
Absolutely. And Grandview has been so close to the top of the mountain the past few years. This was their 2nd NAIA title in program history, but getting all of those, the previous guard almost, right? It seems like you're getting past all of those trials, validating all the work that this program has put in over the past few years. Woodley, obviously, as the head coach, has been around this program, was an assistant when they won their first title. And it just means a lot to those guys. They've been so close for so many years. And finally, just piecing it together in such dominant fashion, it's well-deserved. It's well-earned. And now we also have to consider, man, the Hart Conference. This is just proof that that conference is legit right now, if we had any doubt. Because if this is the top team in that conference and they are just cruising by everybody, the rest of the country better watch out.
I'm with you there, man, 100%. Their mascot is pretty badass, by the way. Cool little Viking.
Victor.
I mean, Viking as a mascot's kind of a layup, I think, in general, but they nailed it. But
Yeah.
otherwise, some notes on this one. You had mentioned, wearing with the 200 yards rushing on the day, 353 total for the Vikings. I mean, this game was 21-0. Was it as one-sided in person as it may have seemed in the box score and from checking out the clips on my end?
Yeah, absolutely. You could tell the momentum was just entirely in Grandview's favor.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much every situation Kaiser had to swing it back their way. Grandview either responded immediately or stuffed out the flame before it got too hot.
Yeah.
Like they were just ready to pivot and ready to go and were prepared for everything Kaiser threw at them. And that's to say Shea Spencer had like a pretty decent game. Like he didn't have a bad game by any means. Their offense was doing all right. Andrew Burnett obviously had a decent rushing day, but Grandview just stepping up when it mattered, and it deflated Kaiser. You could see it for most of the game. They didn't know what to do. They had no response for most of what Grandview was putting out there.
Nothing like a nice ice cold Gatorade bath to cap off the festivities down there in Durham. Totally oblivious. You feel like these coaches got to have some awareness of what's going on and maybe catch them in the act there.
It was actually funny because towards the end of the game, even though Kaiser wasn't going to win, obviously, you still want to put forth the effort that, like, hey, we still care.
Of course.
So they were using their timeouts at the end of the game, and they still had like 1 or 2 timeouts when that Gatorade bath happened. And they were just like, you know what? Like, whatever. They just like, we're not even going to, do it the rest of the way. But
so you're sitting there soaked for the last couple minutes. Trying to coach.
Yeah, just like sitting there, everybody's trying to figure out, do they call a timeout, do they not? And the refs were just like, game's over,
Oh my goodness, dude.
Yeah, and it should be noted, pretty physical game too, might I add.
Yep.
Refs were letting them play pretty much the whole time.
Okay.
So it was getting a little chippy out there from time to time. But obviously national championship game emotions are going to be running high. So
yep. Big time win. The boys, they represent Iowa well. You can see the hardware right there. And I think, we talk a lot about the offensive side. I know you had a defensive player highlighted there. Is it Jackson? Is it Filer?
Yeah, Jackson Filer. Defensive guy who won the defensive player of the game. Media credentials, we were able to vote for those players. It was hard for Grandview because it was such a well-rounded defensive effort by Grandview where you look at those individual stats and nothing really stands out. But that just means that they all played so well and played so cohesive as a unit that you really could have named any one of those guys towards the top of that stat sheet. Dane Johnson, also somebody who had a fantastic game. Interesting note, though, I don't believe there were any sacks, maybe one across the board, but both the lines came to play. It was just interesting that Grandview very obviously was able to generate more pressure and put a little more heat on Shea Spencer throughout the game. So
no sacks. Just check, by the way, no sacks, not one.
Yeah, so both the lines played really well, but Grandview's defense was still able to take advantage of the pressure they were getting. It's again something that doesn't appear on a stat sheet because you just assume that both the lines played great. And Kaiser's O-line did play great, but Grandview's D-line was also up to the challenge. They were in Shea Spencer's face a good chunk of the time and forcing him to throw the ball out of bounds or take his second or third read and go from there. And
that's a talented quarterback, right? Like the ability to, even though they're probably very disruptive, might not show up in the stat sheet because he gets out of the pocket and throws it out of bounds or eludes a defender and has to, do it with his feet. But that defense, I mean, to your point, in the red zone, holding that Kaiser offense 0 of 3 inside of 20 yards there in the red zone, a couple big takeaways there for that defense. It was just a really incredible performance. 1 of 13 on third down, you mentioned earlier, just they won every single aspect, seemingly, of the box score. And when you do that and you put yourself in that kind of situation, it's hard to not be on the right side of history.
Yeah. And I mean, another just insane stat from this game is that Grandview forced Kaiser to turn over on downs 4 times in this game. 4. Like 4th and 1, 4th and 2. Towards the end of the game, I think there's like a 4th and 4. Dude, they were on it. Kaiser was 4 for 8 on 4th down for the day. So obviously not terrible production on that end, but forcing them into all of those high leverage situations just shows that your defense came to play, and capitalizing on half of those when most of those are 4th and short, it's a big momentum swing for you. And it showed. Absolutely showed.
100% agree with you there, man. And this Kaiser team, I mean, under quote unquote first year, I mean, in the position of Miles Russ, man, to be able to pick up this team and for them to be back in the national championship, I think is, respectable in its own right. And had they gone and done it again, that would have been ridiculous. You lose Coach Socha to Lenore Ryan, who the Lenore Ryan coach made the move up to the Division I level at Mercer. So you had this whole kind of trickle-down effect when it came to these prominent football programs picking up head coaches from lower levels. We've seen a lot more of that with the Bethel head coach or with the Cortland head coach, the D3 level. But, I digress. Like this Miles Russ, what he's been able to do to keep this group together with some new pieces too. Like this Kaiser team had quite a bit of few, especially on the offensive side of the ball, I think some few big new faces and additions to that offense. So I would think it's pretty safe to imagine that we'll be seeing them, whether or not it's on the national championship stage, we'll be seeing them in the playoffs most likely again in 2025.
Yeah, and Kaiser had an absolutely great season. Nothing to be ashamed of. Obviously not the way you want your season to end, but the fact that this team had so much turnover and was still able to produce the way that they did and looked dominant for such a large portion of the year. It's also worth mentioning that the Cliff Harris Award, which is the NAIA Defensive Player of the Year, went to Kaiser D lineman Ty Lologo, which is super impressive. Had a fantastic season. But man, Grandview was ready for him. He was. I don't want to say he was silent because obviously he was still making plays and stuff, but he was. I mean, they took
minimize the impact.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So, but yeah, if you're Kaiser, you can't be too upset about this. The team is in a great position going forward. The leadership they have in place, even with all the changes, obviously prepared to make another run like this. So don't expect the Seahawks team to go anywhere. But same with Grandview. I mean, they are just rolling. They're going to have a good chunk of this team back next year. It's going to be fun to see how both teams respond to this in 2025. But Grandview far and away putting themselves above the rest of the competition from this season.
And I think in the Grand perspective, too, this is still a very, very young Kaiser team in terms of maybe not their player age, but in terms of how long has this program been around and how long has Kaiser been, funding a football program in general, right? And so I imagine they're only going to learn from experiences like these. That's what's crazy to think about is I equate them to West Florida and the D2 landscape and that West Florida played in the national championship, I think, in their second year as a Division II football program. And so you look at a Kaiser team like this, I think it's almost apples to apples. And you talk about geographically, there's literally something in the water. I don't know if it's in the Gulf there or offshore. I don't know what's going on, but it's really respectable. So excited for both those and excited that you got the opportunity to be there, dude. That's pretty fun stuff.
Yeah, it was really awesome. Usually, at NAIF ball, Corey's the guy who goes and does it. And just due to scheduling, it fell into my lap this year. So shout out to Corey for hooking me up with those media credentials and letting me get out there. It was a really fun weekend. But being able to see it in person, man, and just seeing how dominant Grandview was, it's hard to imagine any other team would have taken this game from them.
Yeah.
Kaiser obviously was not so much up to the challenge, and I don't know if any other team would have been. You'll get some of the other teams, Benedictine, Morningside, like Grandview was just on a whole nother level up to the challenge. So it was really fun to see in person for sure. And hopefully I can be back next year. That's the plan. So fingers crossed.
And that's the feeling you want walking away from a national championship, right? Is like, this is the team. Like nobody was given these, like this is the best squad in the land. And I think that's something that gets lost with, especially talking about the D1 playoffs right now. And people get upset about blowout this and, this team not so competitive. Maybe on the other side, instead of discrediting these teams that come up short, a team like Kaiser that we know is a quality football team, let's shift that to more credit on the side of a Grandview, on the side of a credit of the side of a winning team of like, I don't think you want to walk away being like, oh, maybe on a different day, this team comes out, on top, like this, whatever. Like, no, this was the best team in the country this year. And I don't think there's any doubts about that. And that's the way football should be. Does it always pan out like that? No, it's any given Saturday. But I think that's a good kind of leaving note there.
For sure. Yeah. And it was pretty obvious for me, man. And I was there with my own two eyes looking at it. So maybe the TV showed a different story, but looking at the box score, just seeing how everything else shaped up, it was all signs point to the Vikings, all roads lead to Iowa.